Hey, folks. So this week we're doing things a little bit different. To get into the energy of this week, I'm actually talking with my friend and family, Dr. Moya Bailey, as she is a cultural worker who is working on various projects to help us collectively reimagine our place as humans in this world. And right now, we are all being asked to work on a collective project. What does it mean to be human? And to do that, we need to resurrect and inhabit the things that bring that humanity out of us all, which is our creativity via stories and storytelling in various ways. So this week, the Cosmos is asking us and telling us that we got to reclaim our stories via the body and the concept of the family, because those are the two locations that these power structures are trying to overtake and sell back to us in their way. We're seeing this with Venus conjunct Jupiter in Cancer, while at the same time we have this kite formation with the outer planets in Saturn alongside Mars in Libra. So then what does abundance and pleasure in a time of chaos and destruction really look like, smell like, feel like, taste like? What is it calling us to do to imagine or reimagine as we are also in a battle for our rights as people, since citizenship is not the location that we can place our humanity? This is the weekly forecast for August 13th through 19th, what I am calling cultural workers in a time of change and chaos. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Yapping with the Stars, the show where I talk about life in spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. I'm your host and guide, Dr. Nicole Rouse, a storyteller who comes from a line of storytellers who weave and tell stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now, the present is up for grabs. So, who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? So every Wednesday, we check into the chaos that we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, or reflect upon? Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this week's show, this is going to be a conversation between myself and cultural worker Moya Bailey. And I will have the weekly forecast available, but that is going to be on my Patreon as normal going forward. So if you're interested in kind of the daily breakdowns of the week and the questions and prompts that I provide to help move with and through this energy, then please subscribe to my Patreon. That is a space that allows me to be supported so that I can continue to create and produce this show along with other future projects in the public. So please consider subscribing to the Patreon. Tiers start as low as $5 a month, okay? So, why am I talking about cultural working now and bringing in a conversation as an example of how we can do this in the public? Well, I'm talking to Moya in particular right now because of patriarchy. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's a documentary coming out on the Friday, August 15th, called Magic City in American Fantasy. And it's about the strip club, the famous strip club in Atlanta called Magic City. Now, 21 years ago, Moya was a student at Spelman College, and herself, along with nine other students, joined together and wrote a letter to the rapper Nelly about his use of Black women's bodies in his now infamous music video from the early 2000s called Tip Drill. And in the video, there were a few dancers from Magic City who were featured. And there was a specific part of the video that involves a credit card and a butt, right? That has become a main focal point for a lot of conversation back then and even now when we reflect upon the kind of moment back then in the early 2000s, right? And let's be real, the early 2000s do not have a good look in the present day at all for a lot of these cultural artifacts that at the time represented, quote unquote, the culture. And we got to talk about what is the culture, especially outside of the power structure's gaze and definitions of it. Okay. Well, that letter that they sent to Nelly and the subsequent actions taken by Nelly's team led to a media fallout for and about Moya and those other students, right? That would have lasting impact and effects on Moya and the work that she has done since then. And so Moya was actually interviewed for the documentary that is coming out, and she will be featured. Yet the questions that she was asked and her discomfort after the fact led her to wanting to take the story up her way. have the conversation in a space and place in which she did feel supported. And I felt honored that she felt supported and able to have this conversation with me on my show. So this is what we're talking about, all right? And it really relates to the cosmos in this current moment, because what does it mean to take back your authority? By taking back the origin story and telling it your way as a way to push back against the current power structure that will use anybody in order to maintain its patriarchal dominance and gaze, right? And this is really the conversation that is being asked of us all with the planets that are in Cancer, Jupiter for the long haul, Venus right there. We're going to get the moon in this week, right? Alongside, again, this kite formation with the outer planets that Saturn is involved in with Neptune, that's in a direct opposition still to Mars in Libra. But Mars is having a conversation with Mercury in Leo, that's also in a conversation with that Uranus in Gemini. So this is a time of change, right? In a time of chaos. And so what does it mean for us to retell and remake the stories that lay the foundations for what we are trying to create? But do we know the stories that we are trying to create? Because do we understand the foundations that we are trying to remake? That is the energy, not only of this week, y'all, but past weeks and going forward since some outer planets change signs, okay? So this is what we're going to get into. But before I introduce Moya and then go into the conversation, I also want to remind folks that, again, if you want to listen to the weekly forecast, I do have that breakdown, but please go to my Patreon. And also this month, since it is my birthday month, my birthday's next week, y'all, August 21st, I am very excited to get the fuck out of this 8th house year and get into a 9th house year because, baby, I can't die no more. Something's got to be reborn. So to honor my birthday and to celebrate that, I'm running a special this month for all my astrology assessments. Use the code birthday. You get $44 off any astrological reading this month. Okay. And finally, this Saturday, August 16th at 10:30 a.m., I'm going to be doing a live. I don't do lives very often, but I'm going to be doing a live over on IG. I'm going to try to see if I can also get it to stream on the YouTube as well, but it for sure will be on IG. And I'll be in a conversation with Kay Mala Bruja on IG. I love her, Charlene. I've worked with her in the past, and I love and respect her work as an active Apatabi in the Lukumi tradition, in a house in which she feels supported and respected in as a queer practicing, openly queer practicing practitioner. And she's also a tarot reader, a very gifted reader, I should say. So what we're going to do is have a conversation and talk about the present moment working with tarot and astrology. So she's going to throw some cards. I'm going to talk about in relationship to what's going on in the stars. We may invite folks in, but if anything, when her and I get together, we talk about all kinds of things through a queer ass lens about what does it mean to work with spirit. So if you're interested in that, join me on my IG. My IG is at Dr. Nicole Rouse, Dr. Nicole Rouse. 10:30 Saturday morning, we'll be live. All right. Live and telling all kinds of stories as well. All right. So now let me tell you about Dr. Moya Bailey. Moya Bailey is a kitchen conjurer, descended from Mammy the midwife, Flozy in Alberta, all from scratch cooks who use food as art, medicine, and magic. Mama D, Nadine, the Green Thumb, and Carlton are intuitives whose inner knowing has also passed to her. She's a professor at Northwestern University, is the founder of the Digital Apothecary and co-founder of the Black Feminist Health Science Studies Collective. Moy is a digital alchemist for the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network and the board president of Allied Media Projects, a Detroit-based movement media organization that supports an ever-growing network of activists and organizers. She is also the co-author of hashtag activism, networks of race and gender justice, and is the author of Misogynoir Transformed, Black Women's Digital Resistance. She's an award-winning documentarian after completing the short documentary You Just Watch and See from 2025 that featured her late cousin Dolly, and she is now completing a docuseries on misogynoir in medicine. Now, I want you to remember something, y'all. This week, your body is taking you on a journey of the self via your authority. What you feed yourself and how you nurture and care for the self. And that self interacts with all kinds of structures, government authority, and the stories they tell us so that we buy into their authority by giving up ours via the body. So are their stories true? What happens if we take back that authority via the stories you tell about you in the state? Institutions that exert power over us, like capitalism and its many forms, What happens if we imagine new structures of governance and work by reimagining our relationships to family, home, and care? As again, that is what structures of power are trying to recreate and sell back to us in their way that benefits them. If the family becomes another, again, even more state sponsored location to groom us into being good workers, then what does it mean to completely reconstitute the role of the family in the construction of the self? Who are you raising and why? Are you allowing your child to be raised their own autonomous human being that you are guiding and giving lessons to so they can actually see that they have a responsibility to their own sense of self and don't let themselves be taken because they are told that their childhood means nothing in a capitalist system when being a child means everything in a human based system, in systems of governance and care? When we don't value the child, we cannot value ourselves because we don't value our own childhood, our own inner light, our own Leo. Okay? The body and family are powerful. You are powerful. Take your power back and rewrite the stories that will lay the foundations for a new type of nation/nations. All right, let's get to the conversation with my good friend, family, and brilliant mind, Dr. Moya Bailey. So what's interesting about having this conversation now is because of where the astrological transits are. Literally, Mars went into Libra today. It's August 6th when we're recording, right? And when we think about Mars in Libra, like people talk about it, and you're Libra rising. So people talk about Mars in Libra. Well, it's known to be in detriment because Mars, it can't essentially go to war like it wants to in Aries, Scorpio, or say Capricorn. But then the question then becomes, has that way of engaging with Mars actually worked for us as a collective, as humans, right? So when we think about now this transit of Mars and Libra in this time of the outer planets, all changing signs, they're part of this kind of grand trine that Mars and Libra is now forming the end of a kite to opposing Saturn and Neptune and Aries. That's all technical jargon for what? The fact that we're having to sit in the tension of needing to get clear about what we truly want in relationships and justice and the ways in which our economies work, and that there's going to require more of a balance via compromise and coalition and cooperation that we may be uncomfortable with. But in that uncomfortability, that is where we can actually realize what sustainability of these new structures going to look like, right? Because it's in a conversation with Pluto and Uranus. So we're actually being asked right now to go through a transformation of the ways in which we strategize and engage with things like sex, war, passion, and all that like, right? Because the ways in which we look to our knowing and who we look to lead Uranus, Gemini, genius needs to change, right? So
Yeah.
Mars is opposing Saturn and Neptune because we need to oppose those who claim to be authority figures who are again retrograding, reverting back to the same tropes, right? Neptune retrograde, the same tropes that they use to dominate, which is nothing more than patriarchal white supremacy. But this but we now can see it that this don't work for us. It's some bullshit, right? So all that to say, it's interesting when we put that kind of conversation happening in the stars right now for us collectively into why we're having a conversation right now, revisiting retrograde, revisiting an incident that happened, what, 20 years ago now? Is it 20 years, Moya?
Yes. Yeah. It's more than 20
20 years?
years. Yeah. 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 I think
You know, like,
yeah. I
go
think
ahead,
it's
sorry.
literally, oh no. It has been, I think, 21 years since the so-called Nelly incidents happened. I was a undergraduate at Spelman College, president of the Feminist Majority Leadership Alliance, and I was a card-carrying feminist at an HBCU when that was not the thing to be. And I was home for Christmas break watching TV, and I saw the Tip Drill video just up late. And I remember being scandalized and being like, what is happening? And when I got back to campus, we were talking about it. And we just felt really kind of affronted by the video, not just by the imagery, which of course has, what has now become very classic and kind of a standard trope in terms of
Mhm.
you know, nearly naked women shaking their ass for a very small group of men. who don't seem to care about them. That was very much what was happening then. However, there was also an added insult to injury in terms of the lyrics. So it must be your ass because it's not your face. So like she's not cute. It's just about her ass. And so we were young people trying to make sense of this uh, imagery at the same time that we were alerted by our Student Government Association that Nelly was going to be coming to campus for a bone marrow registration drive to try and get more Black women to donate bone marrow. And what was interesting about this moment was Nelly felt completely comfortable asking us to support him in this endeavor, largely in support of his sister who had leukemia. And uh, we wanted to ask some questions about the way Black women were being represented in popular culture more generally. And we were young. We were, barely 20, if 20, and wanted to ask some questions and very politely we're thinking, we'll write Nelly a letter and we'll ask him, what are you thinking in terms of these representations and lyrics? And we were in a class, Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftal, and she was like, "What y'all think a letter gonna do? what's what's a letter gonna do? What's a letter gonna mean?" And so we had this conversation and decided that we wanted to invite him into a conversation and potentially have some opportunity to discuss what this means. And in that moment of wanting to have this conversation, Nelly's people said, absolutely not. We're not going to do it, and pulled out of doing the bone marrow registration drive altogether. And what was interesting about that was we were a small group of students. We're talking about, 10 students who had this kind of passion to think about this. Most of the student body was like, we want to see Nelly. Like, why are you interrupting our path to meeting a celebrity? So it wasn't something that was happening all over campus. And when the event was supposed to happen, we still ended up having some commentary, getting people to think about what this video means, etc. And it blew up in an international conversation because Nelly went to the press first and said that Spelman said no and said he couldn't be on campus, which again isn't what happened. So it became a media firestorm, not even through our own efforts. And I think that was an early lesson in how misogynoir works, in that even though we were the ones who were raising questions about this representation, then the ire was directed at us for not wanting to do something that was supposedly beneficial to all Black community. We were seen as the ones who stopped this really important work of bone marrow registration from happening, even though Spelman ended up doing their own drive, a few weeks later. But the conversation was such that Spelman students, on the whole, said no to Nelly. And again, a small group, a committed few, raised some questions. And even then, the conversation and firestorm that grew out of it was much bigger than us.
Ah, and then it's interesting because now again we're in retrograde season, but now we come back to the present 21 days later, in 21 years, excuse me, 21 years later, right? And we hit 2025 and Nelly's in the news again, right? Nelly comes in the news again, but it's on for his own accord and for his own words. While we're also being shoved down our throats, no offense, this new reality show with him and Ashanti, in which again, his words that coming out of his mouth are what is revealing who he truly is. So if we think about this idea of the Black community, right? And 21 years ago, as students, y'all were accused of denying a full community the ability to access a supposed like cultural worker, right, for said community. And then what do we see? The reality of what it means to commodify the community versus actually being in it. And I want to talk with you about that a little bit more, because a lot of the work, when we talked last, it was from my former podcast, and we talked about the art of gathering. For the whole point of you being on then was to talk about how you gather people together in community and the focus and reason for that. So, can you talk about your ideas of community and why then, even if reflecting back now, right? Because now you're 40, just turned 42, right? There's a way in which you've had a lot of your own experiences. Why are you still committed to making clear what the actual origin story of this was? And how did it inform the work you did? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but how did it then go into inform the work you've done over the past 20 years?
Such a great question, Nicole. I think this remains a really important moment for me because it was my introduction to how Black women are treated and understood. We were students, and yet we were expected to make space for Nelly, to make room for the way that he
Mhm.
got his money, which largely included using Black women, using Black women's dance, using Black women's bodies to promote and build his own career. We were expected to step aside because he was doing something good for the community now. This was something that was supposedly to benefit Black women, Black people. So our concerns were not considered meaningful, and there was no understanding of how this fit into a larger conversation around capitalism, misogyny, and now misogynoir. So this experience actually was one of the things that made me start to think about misogynoir, the very specific anti-Black racism and misogyny that is directed at Black women and people read as Black women. We got so many letters. That was my first experience getting death threats. That was my first experience getting told that we were ugly haters, lesbians who nobody wanted. Part of it really trying to denigrate us and make us feel like our ire and our objection to the way that the Black women in the video were represented had everything to do with us not being uh, chosen, us not being desirable, and that this was the hate of girls who would never be picked. And so that was one of the things that really got me thinking about how misogynoir works, and that critique can be shut down if you can dismiss the people who are raising the critique. And so many people felt like, who are we to challenge Nelly? And to me, this is also wild because at the same time that they're denigrating us, saying that you ain't shit, never gonna be shit, at the same time, they're also saying, like, leave Nelly alone. Like, why are you yelling at this Black man who's trying to help us? So it's the both and of that we are both um so little and so inconsequential that our anger is not justified, and it's very much depending on our marginal status in society. But at the same time, we're doing too much, and that we're creating too much negative attention for Nelly. And so we should really know our place and slow our roll. So it was a real lesson in how I started to think about misogynoir, that very unique way that Black women are targeted that is different from other people. I do not see the kind of attack, intra community attack that we experienced happening in other communities. That was one of the things that really resonated for me. And I have been really thinking about how so much of this has to do with people wanting the idea of somebody who made good, of Black people who ascended, Black people who became part of whatever we imagine to be the elite 1% of society. And here we are critiquing him when he's made it. Like that to me seemed to also be one of the things that we were being disciplined for. How can you cast aspersions when Nelly made it and so few of us do? Uh, we were definitely pitted as people who weren't in touch and were really conservative and being respectable in terms of our critique as well.
Mhm. So there's a way then, right, that incident heavily impacted you, which led into a whole new kind of opening up of a theory, like misogynoir is something that you coined, and that has been really leading a lot of kind of Black feminist thought since the inception of the concept, if we're being honest. But I want to go back to the incident and come in out of your head and into your body. How did that make you feel? Because there's a way that the incident really did help you understand, like, is that Gemini sun, right? It has to make sense of kind of nonsense, right? So you did that and you pushed forward, right? And you've made space. We're going to come back to like what you've actually been able to open in that community conversation, how community was still a big part of your work. But I also don't want to forget your humanity, right? So then how did that make you feel? How did you navigate having people tell you that you was a problem because you who love the community and the culture were accused of denigrating the culture, right? That's a hard blow, but you still love the culture enough to figure out a way to make space and room. Like that's a love. That's love. That's real love. But those who love deeply need love back. So I want to talk a little bit about that before we go more into like the work itself.
Nicole, that is the question. I felt it in my body. I felt it in my body. And I think we've talked a little bit about this in other contexts. I think it made me very closed. And when I think
Yeah.
about even my own way of navigating the world, it definitely made me more closed off than I think I was before that time. There were so
Yeah.
many people commenting on, and they didn't really see that much of us, but we did one radio show, and the radio host, I think, said afterwards, like, said something on the radio about, like, called us dykes, I think on the radio in Atlanta. Just, and even then, I wasn't fully in my queerness in a way that I thought was legible. I mean, obviously, people were clocking me, but I definitely was like a little bit like taken aback also in this way that was like, now wait a second, sir. Um, but I think it definitely made clear the way that women's bodies are always open for comment and for dissection. And definitely for me, made me feel alone and very protective of myself, both my image, my representation. And that is something that has stayed with me. I think I'm more circumspect than I would be if all of those things had not happened. And what's interesting too is that one of the things that we were accused of was having some kind of respectability politics ourselves. And I don't know that we had that. I mean, there was, we did our own little documentary about that time. And one of the students said, I think students might protest to drill on Thursday, but still go to the club and shake their ass on Friday. Like we could understand, I think, and
Hmm.
hold things to be true at once, that this particular representation circulating in media becoming the predominant way that people, particularly people outside the US, come to understand Black women is through these continued representations that don't show our full agency. That is one thing. And then also our personal experiences in the club, dancing, our personal experiences trying to navigate this world. Those two things can be separate, but they inform each other. And it's not a
Yeah.
situation where we are free to do as we want. even though we should be. And this isn't about policing behavior. It's just that these representations do have impact beyond just being representations themselves. And so people kept saying things to us like, well, sex sells, like the
Mm.
salaciousness is part of how we're getting and grabbing people's attention. But I think we're now in a place where that's not even tip drill and other things like it have moved the bar so far that it's not just about trying to give a representation pulls or draws people in, it's still promoting a narrative where women are only as good as how they look, only as good as what their bodies can do in support of capital, and they don't have the ability or position to be authentically themselves.
Yeah. And then this idea that sex sells is always interesting to me too, because especially we're going to bring back to the present again, retrograding and then coming back to the present and reflection. We are in the era of post Diddy trial. We are in the era of these kind of rise of people talking about the Epstein files, right? We are in the kind of hysteria once again that we saw before of now going into more conservative, real conservative rule, right? The kind of demonization of anything sexual via queerness, right? So just being queer yourself, however you identify on that spectrum, is now seen as deviant. And we're returning back to this kind of very fantastical traditional understanding of womanhood, right? We can think about the Sydney Sweeney and an invocation of these kind of genetic purity thing, right? So someone might be like, well, isn't that a
Yeah.
stretch? Kind of right? And it's not, and people might be like, well, that's a big stretch going from tip drill in the 20 years ago to now. And it's like, but is it? Because what have we made palatable? What have we made normalized that now we're being forced to have to, as a society, review? Right. And it's not even about like, I mean, I can say it for you. It wasn't that y'all weren't wrong. Y'all weren't wrong. Right. So what does it mean? But there's not just one right way. You know what I'm saying? And
Exactly.
so I think there's an interesting conversation that it kind of has to be had right now. And it's funny because they're opening up the conversation with this Magic City documentary. That is the whole point of us kind of coming together. Well, initiated us coming together. This Magic documentary is going to come out on the 15th, you said, of August. And in that, I don't want you to explain what's going to be like why Magic City documentary is connected to Tip Drill, but in that you were invited in to have a conversation. You were invited in to review, right? But that review didn't necessarily again see your humanity. It was almost like a repeat of what happened then. So can you explain to folks who are listening why are we actually talking about this now? What, and
Yeah.
then in relation to this documentary, and then what being on that set triggered something in again in your body to be like, I got to make sure that other origin stories are told about this.
Yes. So it's interesting. The tip drill incident is the gift that keeps on giving or the curse that keeps on cursing in some way in my life. Um, I was approached by this production company to be involved in a Magic City documentary to talk about what happened with Tip Drill through the lens of the strip club in Atlanta, Magic City, that is infamous for kind of just being that place in the city and Atlanta stripper culture in general really becoming something that people understood nationwide for a moment in the early aughts through the 2010s. I think there was a big way
Mhm.
that Magic City
Yeah.
had made a mark on the city of Atlanta and beyond. And I think that history is important to tell. I mean, there's something about the DJs there, the way that music moved there. That's also part of this narrative that they're trying to share. But my involvement was because many of the dancers who were featured in the Tip Drill video were dancers who also worked at Magic City. And so when we were raising questions about the very infamous credit card swipe between white chocolate's butt cheeks, that was something that people really hung on to. And the narrative that Nelly has told, and I think the narrative that a lot of people have is, well, white chocolate suggested that. So it's not my fault. She's the dancer. That was her choice. Sure. And sure, that is her choice. But I think it's a choice that is just so very clearly an articulation of Black women as a commodity, Black women as being part of a capitalist infrastructure that makes money for Nelly, but leaves white chocolate as an incidental note and figure in a history. The question is, what kind of career does white chocolate have now? What kind of career do these other dancers have now? Whereas Nelly has been able to continue and maintain his legacy as an artist despite making many more faux pas on the way. I mean, if we think about just the most recent incident of, performing for Trump's inauguration, these are stories, blips in the history of Nelly, but Nelly's career, money, etc., remains intact. So this propelled my thinking around misogynoir, and it was something that I wanted to bring to light when I was approached about participating in the documentary. However, the experience of participating was one in which I had to and was treated like I think a lot of the dancers have been treated in other contexts. So I was allowed to speak, but there was a statement that we had written at the time, and they wanted me to read a specific part where we call out the more salacious parts of the dancing. They wanted me to, I said something about strip clubs being a place of possibility, and they wanted me to repeat that perhaps as a Frankenbite for another moment in time. I'll be curious to see where and if that shows up in the documentary, in what context. And also, me reflecting on ourselves as young people who I think in some ways had what I would label now a bit of a paternalistic view in terms of how we were approaching our relationship to other people in the world. I think that there's a bit of paternalism that we had internalized, but no more so than the rappers and other people who are trying to speak on behalf of dancers now. But that comment, I'm curious to see how that gets taken up. Me sort of admitting our youthful sense of everything's a nail because we have a hammer, and not the kind of nuanced perspective that I have now. I'm really curious how that will be reflected in the documentary.
Well, and that's interesting too, because this idea of going back to what some of the things that you were told, right? I wrote down that one of the biggest things that seemed to come out is that y'all were accused of trying to essentially keep somebody down. Like he made it. So if you and your kind of, higher ed tower want to come in and just kind of do all this theory, he made it. But then we see at what cost, because it's easy to sell out your people. It's easy to sell out any body, an actual body, right? When it always comes down to that dollar, right? But even that dollar ain't worth what it was even 2 years ago at this point. So then what are we even doing this for when we're shucking and jiving for a state that is literally robbing us blind? Right. And I think that's where the conversation is really interesting to have right now when we're talking about concepts of excellence, Black excellence, this idea again of community, of what we're trying to build. Um, and this idea again of desirability, because we are, again, these loops are happening because as this Magic City documentary is coming out, what else is happening right now in social media streets? We got a whole conversation with Laverne Cox about who she has decided to in the past take up relations with, And the same topics had came up in that conversation that just happened, right? With a bunch of folks about desirability, being chosen, right? And this idea then of who is allowed to choose, who is allowed to be chosen, and who can really see you when you represent a community, but that community may not really fuck with you,
This is such a good
even
point.
though you
And
love said community.
absolutely. And this is the piece with the dancers that I think is important that doesn't often get highlighted is that even within these spaces, there are hierarchies within hierarchies. And so, one of the things I was struck by at the time when all of the Nelly stuff was happening and the subsequent conversations that happened after, there was a real distinction that dancers wanted to make between themselves and other forms of sex work. I
Yeah,
dance,
the street. Hmm.
I dance. That's different. That's not the same. It's not the same also to be a dancer in a music video versus to be a face model in a music video. I don't dance in the music video. I'm the pretty girl who is the lead model. That's also different, and that's also a different price point. Um, this is also even Tyra Banks making distinctions between girls who model lingerie, girls who are in things like Playboy, right? So there's a hierarchy that even people who are trying to be more nuanced and make more space still end up participating in that pits women against each other, pits people against what is considered an acceptable, appropriate, respectable kind of work and work that is not considered appropriate or respectable. And that to me is also something that's underlying the conversation that doesn't get said. Um, there's a way that stripping, even as it is seen as, uh, even as it has a negative connotation, there's a way that it still isn't seen the same way as people who are doing street based sex work. And also, even in terms of the language that we were using, saying dancer, not stripper, is also doing this work of separating and making sure we understand no, 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 I'm a dancer. I'm not a stripper. I'm a dancer. I don't do street based sex work. And these distinctions are important. I'm not saying that they don't have meaning, but part of their import has everything to do with people trying to manage the stigma that's associated with being a woman working in industries that people don't find respectable in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and to me, this comes back to this kind of idea again of culture and community once again. Like, what are we framing our understanding of culture around then? And again, which then shapes this ideas of communities, and we talk about Black community and all this other stuff that is again coming back up in the conversation, going back to even Laverne, right? And this is no, I'm not honestly like excusing who Laverne was with. That's quite frankly none of our business. So her telling it was a whole nother conversation. Honestly, but her bringing it up in the reaction, I think, is really important to kind of engage with right now because Laverne is a trans woman, a Black trans woman, a doll, a beautiful Black trans woman, right? And so when you listen to Black trans women talk who are hyper feminine, they talk about the backlash they will then actually get for because quote unquote they can essentially pass whatever the hell that
Mhm.
means, right? Whatever the hell that
Yeah,
means in the context in which it is in. So then you
absolutely.
really are a woman. And when patriarchy, men are trained not to like women, and
Yes.
here you are, the embodiment of womanhood, actually the true like, I don't want to say true, but like the essence of womanhood that we are fed, right?
Yes. Yes.
Then you get this
Yes.
backlash in a community, and it was not just the Black community and communities, right? We talk about patriarchy leading communities. You get the backlash of the community that you still do love and it honestly have to be used by because you represent said community to quote unquote be the first. And we know about
Come
you
on.
being the first too. That was literally the residency you did at Beloit with me, right? When I was there, as the first scholar in residence on being the first, right? there is a conversation that we are not being honest about, then, people refuse to truly center for decades now about what it means when you have digested the ways you are told by a state that the way you have to perform your identity, so we're talking about blackness right now, has to be in this bounded way. It must be through the lens of the patriarch who cannot even see himself. And when you have to then perform for said patriarch, right? We then lose the ability to see ourselves in the multifaceted ways that we do culture and community. So I think it's
And that
really interesting right now. Again, go ahead.
No, no, no. I mean, I think this is exactly what I was trying to speak to when I was talking about the hierarchy. You
Mm-hmm.
have internalized a patriarchal understanding of what is valuable. And so part of your stigma management strategy in a world that does not love, does not respect, does not see Black women as human, part of your strategy is trying to align with whatever version of the story you think is going to put you in a better position. And it does not
Exactly.
lead to a collective organizing. It does not lead to
Mm-mm.
maybe a reevaluation of the terms that have been set that we all don't agree with. So this is what happens. It becomes about people's individual relationships
Yes.
to money, people's individual relationships to getting the bag, but it doesn't actually question the terms under which we get the bag. Like my thing, and this is another part that I
Mm-hmm.
hope made it into the documentary. I'm like, if we're going to talk about what women need, like, is there a place where we have a strip club that is worker owned? Are we going to talk about a strip club that has childcare? Are we going to talk about the material working conditions? Is there a union possible? Is what are the terms under which women are working that make this a viable option for getting money, but not a viable option through which to contest the conditions under which we're all struggling? Like that to me is really the question. And I think for Black people in this moment now, and even then, the idea was our individual. If one person makes it, then we've all made it. And that's not true.
Yeah.
What is making it mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean for us to imagine a world where we don't have one celebrity influencer that's trying to get us to think about bone marrow registration? What does it mean if we actually have a communal understanding of our collective survival and thriving? How does that then change our orientation to so many things and capitalism specifically? What does a collective critique of money offer that individual getting the bag, getting your paper, stacking does not?
And that's interesting because the bone marrow piece is what I'm picking up on. And it got me thinking about this idea of like public health, right? The idea that public health as a discipline was created literally to help inform the public about health. But then even public health has had to rely upon the same attention economy that we're all suffering under right now, that everyone's critiquing about, like where we put our attention to. But it's also interesting to me because I want to go back to the question I'd asked earlier because it ties in about the work that you did post this incident in your career and what you went into. So one aspect, yes, is misogynoir, which is foundational still to this day in Black feminist studies of understanding that relationship. But then also you also did a whole other concept that broke some shit too when you talk about Black feminist disability framework, right? I think about bone marrow public health and how you have gone also into concepts of community and health and Blackness via disability in the body, especially as you were again dehumanized and reduced down, right, to these kind of parts of yourself. There was still a love that you had and have, right?
Yes.
For for people to really start to understand, well, but it also did cost you your own ability to, right, integrate for a while, which a lot of us have that story, right? A lot of us.
Yeah.
So that's my reflection. I don't want to put that story upon you, but
Yeah,
that's what
no,
I was
no, no.
thinking about when you were talking. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting because that's what we have to tell these stories. I think it's also important, again, these retrogrades, and I'm purposely bringing astrology in to normalize us having different knowledges at the table to break apart these processes and structures and systems, because just relying upon the one way we are taught knowledge through the fucking colonial that also narrowed our ability to understand how the colonial was formed means that if you truly believe and understand your oppressor, right, you're talking about capitalism, patriarchy, and the relationship between the two and how they form these structures and systems, well, then to believe your oppressor means you have to literally love through it.
Yeah,
Like, and it's not, that's not easy. That is
it's
not a love
not.
and light. That is
No.
fire and brimstone. So can you kind of talk about your own reflection of that as I've kind of told a story for you?
No, I think that's exactly right. You know, it has me thinking also of the ableism of strip club culture, particularly a
Mhm.
place like Magic City and strip clubs more generally. There's been a conversation all about clubs, white clubs having, you know, a two black women rule, like no more than two. If a
Mm.
white club has black women, they can't have more than two. Also, you can't have your natural hair. It's got to be a wig, or it's got to be, you know, we whatever it is. It cannot be. There are so many rules about what desire looks like, what size you can be, etc. And strip clubs, black strip clubs, I think have created more space in a lot of ways, but more space is not the
Mm.
same as an anti ableist approach to this. And it also has me thinking about the longevity. You know, the fact again that Nelly still has a career, but it's not like dancers can still have a career after a certain point. The ageism that happens, people aging out and not being able to sustain one, just being desired anymore because their bodies have changed, or also the actual toll it takes on your physical body to do that kind
Mhm.
of work day in and day out. It's not easy. You know, we've been joking, a lot of elder millennials have been joking about our knees and our, you know, our time dancing in the club and how we can't drop it.
Mhm.
We once
Mm-mm.
I mean, that's all, you know, in jest, but also that's a reality of aging,
Mhm.
a reality that if that was part of how you were making your money as a dancer, as somebody who was working, doing other kinds of sex work, there's a limit to this. There's a limit to the desirability. And youth is a commodity. It's a commodity that works under capitalism. It doesn't work in the same way as you age. And so for me, even as I'm thinking about the disability justice framework that me and Izetta Autumn Mobley created, part of our thinking was Black people think about disability differently, in that you'll find a lot of Black people don't claim or think of themselves as
Mhm.
disabled, despite having lots of different impairments. And I think part of that is our relationship to work, and that Black people have
Mhm.
always labored for this country, understand themselves often, and identify themselves through their jobs, through their ability
Yeah.
to work. That's part of how we
Yeah.
understand our value and worth. And so this also becomes important when we're talking about this line of sex work and people saying, I'm a dancer, not a stripper. I'm a model, you know, all of those different distinctions matter because so much of our sense of self is tied to our jobs. And so part of what this framework is asking us to do, and even this moment is asking of us, is what if we understood ourselves not in relationship to what we could create or produce?
Yeah.
What if we understood ourselves as inherently valuable? What if we understood ourselves as
Yeah.
like people who are deserving of life, not because we have a certain job, a certain respectable job, not because we, you know, move in a certain way. Just our very existence is enough for us to deserve to have our needs met. That's not the conversation that we're having when we're thinking about Magic City. Because again, the conversation is about men's desire and men's ideas of what's valuable and important. And women are really understanding themselves in relationship to their ability to fulfill that fantasy. And that to me is not, does not a revolution make, does not a world I want make.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of the work, that both of us honestly have been leaning into in different ways is this idea of what does it mean then to come back into a humanity, to the human, and when in the actual embodiment process, not the mind, right? And when we're talking about this idea of desirability and the kind of the patriarchal lens that is filtered through those who are identified as men, and this idea of desirability and attraction, I realize now it's illogical when you take a step back and really examine it, because do any of us truly know what we're attracted to? Like, have we ever been taught what attraction is and how to filter it out, because our bodies will do these interesting things like when it is turned on, and it's not always sexual, right? So do we even know what non-sexual turning on means? And we saw this kind of first quote unquote awakening during the lockdowns, when you had all these reports like on social media, and then they were even talking about it in the news about all these folks coming out, right? Coming out at 30s and their 40s. I'm one of those people, right? Because there was a way that the slowdown, like you were saying, once work wasn't centered, because it couldn't be, because going back to health, disease, which again goes back to public health and the lack of understanding, because even public health at that time wasn't good at communicating out. And so again, influences celebrities. Hell, Juvenile and Juvenile had that promo to get people to do vaccinations, right? Using
Yes,
back then. It was good too. That was a good
it was.
it was really good.
It was.
Right? But what does that say when we have to revert to these kind of influencers, celebrities, to get basic information out that actually is the responsibility of the state that we pay taxes to? Like, that really is the contract. Going back to this idea of terms and conditions and contracts. And we both got a lot of Libra rising. I got 4 planets in Libra in the 12th house. Like, baby, what's a contract? Like, there has to be something on the table so that we understand what we're doing. And so then going back to the idea of attraction then too, in this and the idea of the woman's body as a location for men's desirability, when we also know patriarchy overall teaches all of us to not like women and womanhood or anything feminine at the same time, then we can see why everyone's kind of fucked up right now. Like, why we have to rethink all of this stuff from the ground up. And when you were talking, I kept thinking, like, this is a perfect example of that Jupiter in Cancer squaring Saturn and Aries that we're going to see again once Saturn goes direct. And people talk about Jupiter in Cancer being this great benefic, and you're going to have all these unicorns and money raining down. But no, I think that in the square to Saturn, if we see Saturn as again this crone who had to go through the deep waters of removing itself from the shackles of a patriarch via this idea of the Wall Street bro, right? Then Jupiter in Cancer squaring Saturn is saying, okay, well then what is our relationship to care, to nurturing, to Cancerian things? Because if I'm going to expand something, Jupiter expands. What the great benefic is expanding is the fact that there is a tension between what we say we want for care and the reality of the authority we give our head to if they're actually providing that care. So again, getting in the body and asking yourself, what do you really need? And if
Yeah.
all we know about, again, needs, wants, and desires is in this consumption taking, I desire to consume your body, to own your body, but I have no idea if I even like you, because I don't even know if I like myself, because I'm not even taught how to do that.
Ooh,
Right? I think
come on.
that we're at a catalyst right now of of even, I'm really interested in documentary, because it's when we look back, people looking back in those early knots in the present day has not gone well overall.
It hasn't.
Right? And it's because
Hasn't.
we're realizing we were not, we what we were taught then has led to a complete breakdown of our ability to even truly know what we want and are.
And even the idea that like you could have a life where you feel fulfilled and that you're not
Yeah.
using strip clubs as a form of escape. Because
Yes.
honestly, at the end of the
Yes.
day, part of this is stepping into a fantasy. These women are
Yes.
working. These women are working. They are selling a fantasy of desiring you. And that is part of what people are escaping into because they don't have
Yes.
that or feel that in their regular life. And people have learned to exploit that, have learned to create that through this transaction. And again, for me, the question is, but how could we have that in our real life? How could we have the sexual freedom, the sense of being desired,
Yes.
the sense of being seen that we want in our actual life, as opposed to in the space where the transaction is such that everybody's losing but the house. You know what I mean? Like the dancers aren't making enough to sustain themselves. The men who come in are hemorrhaging money for what to what
Mhm.
end? You know, it's not a sense, I do not have a sense that this is raising the collective vibration for the community, nor is it actually getting people closer to the things that they truly want. This is also, when you say attention economy, it has me thinking about just dopamine in general and people chasing dopamine hits however they can. And it's not getting us to a more collective space. It's still very much centering a you get yours, I get mine. That doesn't get us any closer to a space of moving away from these patterns that ultimately keep us very much sleeping and not dreaming in a world that we're not in a world that we actually don't like.
You better say that because it's almost like the attention economy, that kind of dopamine fix you were talking about. It's like we're a bunch of base heads being led by the biggest base head out there right now, who walking around the White House on a roof, trying to talk to everybody and their mama, right? Like, and like we are literally living the embodiment of the essence of a state that was always built on a house of cards, right? With people who were just trying to escape their own inability to be their own king, so they made it here, right? And then we get fed this fantasy, like you said, fantasy. It's a fantasy that requires our docility, because when you live in fantasy, you can't dream. They're not the same, right? And we're really seeing that, like when you're saying sleeping, not dreaming. And it's like this idea of the escapism and the fantasy, right? The house will always win because the house created the fantasy to begin with. It's like the plantation economy, right? So it's the plantation. And we love the theory. We love your theory. People love to talk about misogynoir, talk about disability, love to talk about this idea of master's tools, master's house. But again, when we don't embody that and get uncomfortable in the reality that we also have bought into that and maintained it, if we can just acknowledge that it's there, and how do we root it out? Well, I mean, that's where you have to realize that fantasy is costing you your actual ability to live, because you are walking dead, like you are disconnected. There is a way that, again, the base head, we grew up in the crack epidemic, right? We're in our early 40s. Like, we were heavily impacted by influx of drugs in our communities and the impact that that had in various ways. Even if it wasn't in the actual space, we all were impacted by people basically being drugged up and then also thrown out on the street when they let go of mental health and institution facilities, right?
Yeah.
But now again, we're in a state going back to this idea of disability where they want to institutionalize us once again. Right? They want to
It's a cycle.
institutionalize this. It's a cycle, but there ain't no institutions because they cut the shit. So then we
And
go back.
no, I think this is the piece. We are trying to figure out how to manage ourselves. We're trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to make it in a world that we know fundamentally, that people fundamentally feel doesn't work. Like
Yeah.
part of us seeking out all of these things, whether it's fantasy, some other form of escapism, all of this is because our bodies know, our bodies feel this isn't right, this isn't working. And we're trying to figure out ways to protect ourselves, trying to figure out
Yeah.
ways to find something else, even like momentary spaces of respite. I get it. And the question becomes, okay, but how do we build and how do we also question the fact that these are things that people need when we could have a world that operates differently? Like we
Yeah.
have other options. We have other options and we see it in other places. I'm not going to romanticize sex work in Europe, but I am going to say that there are systems in place that make things a little bit better and make it more like a job than it is here. There's a way that like sex workers, strippers have more just basic job protections that are not happening here in the United States. And that is never part of the conversation because we get
Yeah.
so caught up in the morality
Yep.
play of it all, that we don't actually attend to why is it that this is one of the ways that women can make money lucratively, that has flexible hours? Why aren't those the
Yep.
kind of questions that we're asking? We continue to focus on in other ways, in other spaces that don't get us closer to a reality that we want to channel. And again, patriarchy and capitalism are right there. They're right there, and we're refusing to look at them.
And it's interesting because you're right. It is a morality. There's a moral high ground that's always pulled in these conversations when we're also living in one of the most immoral states. Again, the logic doesn't logic when you really pull back and start to get curious about what we are fed, right? When we actually start to get curious. And I think that was something that I'm hearing as we're reflecting upon what you were saying at the very beginning of the conversation of the origin story from your perspective, right? There was no curiosity in anyone who interviewed y'all.
No,
There was already a definitive black white, right? Man good, students bad, right? And we see this all the time. This is again how we buy into a state that if we want to break, there was no curiosity. So then there is no room for nuance or exploration, right? And I
absolutely.
think that's a big thing we're seeing now too is the replication of that. When we're not curious, then how can we imagine something different, right? Because then all we end up doing is replicating what we know. We go back into a fantasy thinking we're doing revolution,
That
right?
point is so key. It makes me think about what it takes for people to actually acknowledge the world as it is. There was
Yeah,
something circulating on Instagram recently that was like pretty much every country has had to make it law that men can't marry children. Like that
yeah,
has had to be made into law because otherwise men would marry children. And
yeah,
so, what does that tell us about how patriarchy operates? What does that tell us about the deeply ingrained idea that children are property, that
yeah,
children are not to be protected despite what people say? Like, to
yep,
me, that also speaks to um, even the property dynamics of marriage, right? So,
yes,
this also, what you think of children is also kind of what you think of women, that they're property and that that's what this arrangement is. So when we take that into consideration, how do laws like that, how do practices like that that are happening in lots of places not give us all of the fire and brimstone to undo patriarchy as it exists? Why does that for me it's very galvanizing. It's very much a feeling of, oh, okay, this is something happening everywhere. Patriarchy is a
yeah,
problem. We need something else.
yeah. But the something else though is not the opposite, and I think that's where people get hung up a lot, is that we're so used to a really rigid binary. Like, people say, well, then if we just go to, they'll say something like a matriarchy, but they only understand matriarchy as just the opposite.
Yeah,
It's a completely different operating system. Like, it
yeah,
truly isn't whole. It's not an Apple or a Mac. I mean, an Apple or an IBM, right? It's a whole different thing you never heard of before or seen in the modern era in these Western states, right? And I think that's why I get really frustrated. This idea of when we're trying to dream of new worlds and people then want to go into these theoretical battles of like, well, then if it's not capitalism, it's going to be communism or socialism. And then we stop there, right? Then the conversation then stops once again. I had a client yesterday. It was so funny. We're talking about this right now. And I'm doing a transit reading with her. And she was talking about how she wants to figure out how to show up in liberatory justice spaces because she had just left um, a Marxist Maoist organizing group, right, in her hometown. And I already knew why she left before she even said it. So I was like, well, tell me more. And she said, well, I left because like the guy in charge like told us that if we didn't read anything outside of Marx and it didn't matter. And so we were talking about intersectionality, and he told us that that's ridiculous. But then like she was like, but it was like the work was good because it was mutual aid, but then he stepped down because he said he was a narcissist. Like, she was like, it was a lot. Like, he said he was a narcissist. That's why he stepped down. And she's like, so I'm trying to figure out then how do I show up better in a space? And I said, baby, what you mean how you show up better? How you gonna show up better in a raggedy ass space to begin with? Right? And it was interesting because her body had told her, because she's young, she's literally the age you were when y'all were doing the Nelly thing. She was like, her body, her like, this don't make no damn sense. But then she questioned her knowing because she was young. She was like, well,
yes,
maybe I just need to learn more. And I
yes.
said, well, baby, you were learning. The body told you something. And so when you went into the space, yeah, you have to do experiences. I think it's always going to be, pleasant.
Yeah,
But then she believed with the
yeah.
experience, with the body. Then there was a belief. And then I said, well, then what would it look like if you were in an organization that was not led by men or those who only read men?
Hmm.
Because where in the history of the Western world or the modern world has a straight white man gotten everybody free? That's the real question. It's not identity politic. It's not anything. Like, they put their identities in the Constitution. Like, y'all talk about identity politic and wokeness, blame them founding fathers. They placed it in
Come
the
on,
doctrine. They placed it in the
come on,
contract that
come on.
created this nation, but they did not have the authority or the permission of the land. Right? So then how does this matter in the context of what we're talking about with Magic City? Well, then it's the same regurgitation, right, of how we are taught that there's only one way to do culture. There's only
Exactly.
one way to succeed. There's only one way to make it in a system that the house will always win. And the house is the damn nation state, right? And this idea of not protecting. So y'all were students, and no offense, y'all were kids.
We were,
Y'all
we
were
were children.
kids. We're children. We know good and damn well that people really aren't fully developed until you're between 25 and 28. And honestly, you're not even grown until you're about 40. That's what a lot of societies and cultures are. Why? Because you need experiences of life. You need like this living thing. We have different rites of passage. This is why I like astrology with the different timings of life, right? And so y'all were kids.
Hmm.
You had just went past your nodal return. You were figuring out how it went from young, from baby really into a young adulthood. But like you said it earlier, we fetishize youth. We talk about how the youth are going to lead us into revolution, especially now, right, with Pluto and Aquarius. Oh, the youth will set us free. Yet we don't allow youth to actually be at the table as full human beings because they've never been allowed to have their own perspective and voice because we treat children as property, like you just said, right? But we want
Yes,
to use the youth while at the same time telling them that they know what the fuck they're doing. But then you are supposed to then be the parent to adults who have never emotionally regulated enough, but they're the ones now in charge. Like, I mean, again, it's
it
this
makes no
is why I go
sense.
back to how are you protected, right? And so there's a way that I want people to understand with your story. It's like all of that, knowing all of that, but then also feeling all of that. And I'm saying this as somebody who respects Moya as a colleague, but as a friend and as somebody who consider family. there was still a way that you let love lead in how you engage, because you could have chosen cruelty. I always say cruelty is a choice,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And you
We
didn't
definitely,
choose that.
no, we definitely, I mean, even to the very last point, we were like, we're gonna write Nelly a letter. We're gonna write a strongly worded letter to Nelly. He's gonna read it. He's gonna read our strongly worded letter, and he's gonna understand what it is that we're talking about. I mean, that's how we were moving. And even then, our action on campus with all 10 of us, you know, was like the line that we had both then and now was, we care about your sister. Do you care about ours?
Yeah,
And again,
yeah, yeah,
I I have always hated this way of trying to appeal to men's humanity by saying your sister, your mother, your
yeah,
daughter. Like I feel like women's humanity should just exist independent of their relationships to men. But part of what we were trying to say there was like, this is not because we don't, nobody's trying to stop this bone marrow registration drive. You did that. No one is saying that your sister doesn't need the support of a Black community, and particularly the
yeah,
benefit of bone marrow registration from a historically Black college where we are more likely, it's very much more likely that you will find a donor in this population.
yeah,
But as you're doing that search, as you're thinking about that, think about what enabled you to have a platform in the first place for people to take your sister's care seriously. Part of that came from your continued denigration of Black women in your lyrics and music videos. You are
yeah,
able to offer something to your sister that most people cannot in terms of your access and reach, which was built on videos that treat Black women as property and as, you know, backdrops and scenery in your music videos with no agency or voice.
and that would require actually giving a fuck.
Yeah, yeah, it would.
You know what I'm saying? But I think, and I really do mean that facetiously, but also directly, because there's a way that when we're talking about the big, the economic system of capitalism, we throw that around, but there is a real way that it works, and it gets us to not care. Like
Yes,
there has to be a disassociation, right? There has to be I gotta get mine, and that always cracked me up too. Baby, you getting yours, but who gonna be with you? And not even so fine. You say, well, I don't need friends. Okay, great. Who's gonna serve you then? If we're going to go that way, if we're really going to go into the logic of the capital, then maybe let's go all the way in. Let's go all
mm,
the way in. Who's going to serve you then? Who and then do you have the resources? Can you sustain those resources? What is the cost to you, your body, and also your psyche? Because whether you want to disassociate or not, there is a cost to your psyche with this. And we're seeing that in the meltdowns of these oligarchs and technocrats who cannot take anything that is not what they believe to
absolutely,
heart. And when they do, they have an emotional reaction. And the next thing you know, we got a whole ass department being built that dismantled departments that took years to create in less than 5 months.
absolutely.
Right. That's what it looks like when you don't care and it's all about you and you get in your bag. That's at the big level. So then when we bring this down to the kind of local level, and these kind of repetitive conversations we've been having now in the public about culture and who is what identity and who can use the term misogynoir, the creation of new terms. Everybody wants to have their own term, right? And then
Yes,
it's not just in the kind of realm of oppression, but also especially in the realm of disability. Everybody wants to be labeled. Everybody wants to have their particular way in which they experience the world be be put into a box so that you can be seen. But then I'm always asking the question, baby, why do you want to be seen by a state that will just continuously subjugate you? when I went to therapy, when I was going through my divorce, right, my therapist got on my damn nerves because she was too good. We having a whole conversation for a year. Next thing I know, she's like, she'll slide on into Zoom. Well, why don't you go look at this, talking about PTSD and shit. I said, I didn't ask for all that. We gonna do some affirmations. We gonna do some coping mechanisms. You ain't gonna give me 3 diagnoses in 2 weeks and talk about, well, this might shit, right? You know what I mean? And, and a part of it I got, right? A part of it's like, oh, now this makes sense. I have something that can help me understand these things that have always made me feel as if I'm quite frankly, feeling like I'm crazy sometimes. But another part of me is like, but that's not who I am. That helps me understand the way that I have had to cope to navigate a lot of fucking violence, a lot of violence from a very young age, right? And there's a way that helped me like make sense of it. But I told myself, do not sit in this, Nicole, because it's too easy. It's actually easy. It's easy to sit in the diagnosis. It's easy to sit in the label. It's easy to then put that on like an oil after you got out of the shower so that you think that it is actually oiling you up, but then you go outside and it's hot as fuck, so you sweat it all off and you keep putting it on over and over again, right? And the more you put it on, the more you try to make it stick.
Yes.
But what does that sticking do? Because then you clog the pores. Then there's no breath. There's no room. Again, there's no curiosity. And so
Mhm.
I don't know. I think about this idea. You got to, in order to care, you have to actually, in a capitalist society, you got to come back to your body and care about it. Right. Again,
Yeah.
going back to love. This is love
Yeah.
again. This is a love that we aren't taught, but it is there. We just have to choose it. Because again, you have to choose cruelty, but you also then have to choose kindness. You have to
That's so
choose a
real.
love.
And it's also about figuring out who you can trust with that
Yes.
choice. I'm
Yes.
I'm thinking about even in this moment, or even in the moment of the Nelly controversy, we had invited Black China. We had invited white chocolate to campus. And when we invited white chocolate to campus, she initially said she was going to come, but she didn't end up showing up.
Mm.
And I think part of that is because Spelman is still Spelman. So even if we
Mhm.
had, I think, an appreciation for her, even within my problematic framing of dancer in this hierarchy, even if we understood you're a dancer, you're a piece of this isn't you, we understand how this hierarchy is operating. She didn't know us. She didn't know that we felt that way.
Yeah.
Spelman itself is very much operating in a respectability politics model. And even our activism was seen as suspect by the institution until the institution saw that they were getting some positive acclaim for it, and positive acclaim that misinterpreted us as really wanting to be respectable police around what these women were doing, which was not our initial intent. So I think there's something to be said for how we operate within these systems, and that there are multiple systems happening at the same time. And things are always a bit more complicated than they seem on the surface. And at the same time, where do we have space for the nuance and the conversations that get us to a place where there should be a world where white chocolate feels comfortable coming on Spelman's campus and not threatened or afraid of what might happen because of the class politics of the institution, because
Yeah.
of the way that respectability works and operates. And Spelman should also be a place that's, willing to have those hard conversations and really allow people who are in our community in lots of different ways to show up.
But I think I completely agree with that. And I want to add on something that's really important about you retelling the story now is you're also talking about the impact of student activism and collateral
Yeah.
damage, right? And I think that we really have to have folks who were doing this work back in the day tell these stories now so that present day students understand the fullness of what it means,
Yeah.
and not just buy into the mythologized versions that get told over time, right? As a way to then garner this kind of image of what it means to go in and tell the university and demanding and stuff. Because I've always said this, and this is a great example, Moya, your own story. I tell students all the time. Institutions need the activists because they need to know the fault lines. And the activists tell them the fault lines. They give the institution the margins that if there's enough heat there, then they know that that is where they need to put their band-aid attention to, right? So that they can continue on as business as usual. And it doesn't matter good, bad, or indifferent. They will use that energy for its benefit. And when we realize that higher ed in general is the main institution that legitimated the state, then here we go again. It makes sense that Black women's bodies are once again used when Black women's bodies were both the site of labor and reproduction for said state, right? This is where I know people think we're being really theoretical, but it's not. Like, we're seeing the actuality of the theory on the ground and how it will literally keep you in a loop until you allow yourself to step back and actually, again, these review what help when we're retrograde. And in this review, we really are understanding, right? I wrote this down too with white chocolate. There's a really powerful story about trust there.
Mhm.
How can I trust an institution that I don't really know? But I do know. I do know what the institution will do. And even if I want to have a conversation so that you can see me, can you really see me? Because the trust is not there. And I think this is the
Absolutely.
conversation we're having right now, right? With this idea of accountability. And again, we're throwing all these words around, but accountability and community and mutual, all of this stuff, collaborations, all, requires trust.
It
But how can
does.
you have trust if you're not even honest with yourself? Because
And you can't
honesty is
be,
what is needed to trust.
no, agreed. And you can't be honest with yourself if your only understanding of self is derived through a capitalistic lens. Like,
Yes.
you can't trust yourself if you're only understanding yourself through your ability to labor for the system and for the state. And I
Yeah.
think so much of our existence as Black people, particularly, has been through that lens. And part of the like dropping stacks at the strip club is trying to show and prove that I'm worthy. I have money. I am somebody because I am able to expend money in this way, like it doesn't matter. And I will always be concerned about that way of orienting ourselves to this particular timeline and the way we want to move. There's got to be another way. And I do see us choosing that, but the ability to build the kind of trust that you're talking about, that honesty, it starts so much younger, and people are so hardened by the experiences that they've had that it makes it impossible to really trust deeply. And I would
Yeah.
say, and I would venture to say, I don't know white chocolate's story specifically, but I do know that there is a way that misogynoir operates on us early and makes us distrustful of each other, and
Yeah.
has the idea of who we are in relationship to each other always narrated and pitted against a framework that was developed by the patriarchy and supports it. There's some benefit to keeping us separate and keeping us in tension with each other. And the classism of a place like Spelman, I mean, I think we're seeing this too in the second edition of this Ralph Lauren Spelman
Yeah.
Morehouse Oak Bluff situation. There is this aspirational wealth that really mirrors the system as it is constructed and doesn't offer a vision forward that isn't just this system with black faces. And
Yes.
I want more for us. I do. I want more for us.
Well, on that note, I have two more questions for you. Actually, what would you tell your former self, since we're doing the retrograde, right? And with the review and the reflection. And then from there, what are your dreams of the future? Because you want more. So can you share a little bit about what some of those dreams are after you've told your former self some things?
Okay. Little baby Moya. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to respond
Mm,
to the press. You don't have to read every nasty letter that's written to you. Um,
mm,
you don't have to listen to a famed Black Panther calling you out, cursing you out on the telephone. You don't have to do that. You don't have to. You can say no. You can say no. And it's good. It's good for
mm,
you to not internalize this or feel like you have to do something because you did one other thing, you know? You get to set the terms. And I would say that even to myself who did this interview with the producers of Magic City documentary,
mm,
you don't have to answer every question. You don't have to read only what they want you to read. You can ask for more in the moment in terms of what you need or what you want to feel comfortable.
mm,
Uh, those are some things that I would tell my former self that I'm telling myself now. And in terms of what I envision things in two timelines. So in the timeline of today, I do envision and think it's possible for a worker run co op strip club. I think that that is possible in this moment of the world we live in. I think that that would be incredible where the women own their hours, that it's more of a subscription model where people are salaried, where people are getting what they need, and it's not just um, based on kind of performance in the moment.
mm,
Um, and that there is less money being taken away from the actual artist. Like the workers control, it's worker owned, they're making the decisions, etc. In a future world, in the world that I want, like pleasure is not a commodity that's traded. Like pleasure is something that is
mm,
shared and experienced. Pleasure is something that people have access to, whether that's visually enjoying, dance in that way. That's not the basis of our economy, and that isn't how people get paid. There is a
yeah.
universal basic income, and not even basic income. Like, there's an understanding that because you are human, you have rights to food, clothing, healthcare, and leisure time. Like, those are things that are just understood to be part of the human experience. And you don't have to pay for it because it's just part of being born into this planet. You have access to those things. That's what I really want us to get to.
Mm,
And where pleasure is something that people consent to, and it's completely outside of a system of money.
mm. So then what's a song that would encompass that?
Hmm. A song. Ooh. I think of like the sensuality of like summer madness. Um, I
Mm.
just the vibiness of it, and it's not direct, but it feels very sexual, sensual to me, and it feels like there's just a drippy kind of groovy feel to it.
Okay. And I
Yeah.
think, and I asked about the song, right? Because it allows you in the body. I love working with music that way. So,
Yes.
folks who have listened to our conversation right now, if you've at the end of this with us, think about what you would tell your younger self as well. Moya has given us a beautiful opportunity to reflect on a cultural moment that is now coming up again. So we'll have the Magic City documentary and we'll see what happens there. But really, it's not even about that or them. It's really a space for cultural workers who have grown to make a space to reflect upon so others can learn from it. So if you're your own cultural worker, what would you tell your younger self, right, that you know
Mhm.
now? And what are the dreams that you actually do imagine? Not the fantasies, but the dreams. And if you can give it a song or even a playlist, what would that be? And if that playlist becomes the conjure for that dreams to become reality, then what would you do with that? So work with that, y'all. And if you do, please let us know what comes up for you. So, Moya, before we leave, are there any final thoughts you have? Anything we didn't actually cover? Something that you realize you want to say as a Libra? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
I said summer madness, but I'm also feeling
Mm.
happy feelings. Frankie Beverly and Maze too, as
Mm.
again, kind of a vibey, like sensual, playful, kind of erotic, sensual experience. Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. This has been wonderful.
Good, and thank you for coming on. And so, y'all, as always, every week I have my weekly astrological forecast that brings astrology and ethnography together in my way as a storyteller, astrologer, and anthropologist. So come back every Wednesday at 9 a.m. You're going to have a new episode of Up with the Stars, in which we talk with the stars to see how we co-create this thing called life. And this is a special episode as we are in massive retrograde season. We are having a reflection upon the past as a society as we are supposedly going into these new futures with Pluto and Aquarius. And so I will be talking with other cultural workers as it sees fit for us to really have the templates and the stories and the storytellers of where we come from, where we are, so that we can really imagine where we can go. So thank you for joining us. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscapes we can bring the futures that we want to into the present. Till next time. I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. Like Michelle sang, the cosmos, where we come from. The light that lit the way for our ancestors in the dark of night, when they had to leave the spaces that tried to steal their breath and life. Reworking, while also learning how to work with the land that was also being worked. A land and people under duress. The trees did not ask if they wanted to participate in such brutal practices. Yet here they were. Here we are. All beholden to a power structure that only knows how to take and never to give, while telling us this is the right way to live. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. As Michelle sang, the cosmos. reimagine that freedom lied in parable of the sower that sowed the seeds of earth's seed that wanted to bring humans back to the stars, to start again, to start anew. Remember where we come from and who we are. The stars that lit the way, that guide the light. The moon that holds the tides of the waters. Our connection to earth and land. As above, so below. Yet we don't know, because we have lost the above and the below. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free and journey to the cosmos.